Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 where I really start to render out this illustration. So for me, part 1 and part 2 were really all about just figuring out what I wanted on the page, especially because when I started I had no idea what the painting was going to be about. And at first I thought I was going to do an environment, but I ended up doing a character, which I actually don't do as often. And yeah, so part 1 and part 2, I'm just figuring out what I want on the page, and I'm figuring out the mood of the environment and the character or whatever it is that I'll be painting. I'm figuring out the design, the general design language, and making sure that everything is cohesive. Everything looks like it could exist in the same universe. And once I have that, it becomes time to start beautifying it and making it a presentable piece as opposed to just a design. And I think that's really the difference between illustration and design, is that illustration needs to look, it just needs to look good, and design has to serve a purpose. It's one stage in a production of something, but in illustration, there's a lot of design work also, but at the end, you have to beautify it, and the illustration is the purpose for the design itself. So I'm messing with the chest now. So even though I am changing it still, the overall forms are there, the bigger shapes are already there, and any changes that I make are not gonna, they're not going to significantly change the design of the armor or the kind of the kind of design language that the armor has, because the bigger shapes are there. So yeah, any changes at this point are not going to be very major changes. They're just detail filling. And so if you look at this illustration as a whole, those little those little details aren't going to make a big difference. It does make the piece look finished, but it doesn't make a big difference. So the choices that I make when I'm detail filling, if I had made slightly different choices, or maybe if I had just waited a few hours and did it, I might have come up with slightly different choices. And it doesn't matter that much because either choice I make is not going to change the design so much that it will really matter. I like the sort of circular, the place where the shoulder pads connect to the breastplate. I like that, and I like some of the paneling on the chest plate. It's starting to give it a little, it's starting to look a little bit steampunk, but it still looks fantasy. And I thought that was a pretty cool mix. Thinking a lot about reflected light. There's reflected light is what I find really makes forms, is a really easy way to make forms feel 3D. It turns the form away from you. In a lot of cases, there's reflected light when forms turn away from you. And that's, I think, a lot of times when forms look flat in paintings, that's why, because just logically, it's normal to think that, oh, the light side has light on it and the shadow side has shadow on it. And we don't think, I think just naturally we don't think that much about reflected light on the shadow side, but it's definitely there, and we pick it up when we see things. So in real life, when we see reflected light, we don't notice it, but it does tell us that the form is turning away from us. And that's, I think that's a big part of being an artist, is to look at reality and dissect what it is so that we can apply it to our canvases. Messing with the shoulder plate more. I mess with the shoulder plate so much in this illustration. I like the lava light from below. It lets me give some cool orange glow on all the surfaces that are facing down. And you kind of have to be careful when you have a lighting scenario like this, because you can overdo it, and if you have areas of light and shadow, that could be good, but if you have too many sources of light, you end up lighting your whole piece, and your focus is not is not well established anymore. You end up making every part the star of the show. I have that tendency, and it's for me, it's always a battle to try to really keep the point of focus, even though when I'm rendering certain parts, I want to make every part look nice, every part well defined. Oh, so just a second ago, I was still flipping back to my original sketch, and that was to make sure that I'm still keeping that general gesture, making sure that I'm not losing that through illustration, because just the smallest things can make you lose the gesture. I remember there were a few times when I tried just slightly different shapes with the armor and it broke the gesture. So just flipping back and making sure I still had that. I did increase I made the chest a little bit more broad, and I made it a little bit wider in the front, just because I thought the skeleton would have to be pretty squished to exist under there. This is also a warrior character, so she's probably gonna have some muscle on her. She's not gonna be real petite. Adding some highlights. I decided to make the light coming from above. Oh, so I actually decided that I'm going to light this from above also. So I have that warm light from below, and pretty soon, in the illustration, later in the illustration, I'm gonna put this light coming from above, sort of like there's a hole in the roof of this cave or something, and there's just a beam of light shining through and hitting her at an angle right around the chest plate and the face area. So I'm adding this more cool light from above. So all the surfaces that are pointing up, more or less, will have another light source. But I say cool, but really it's still warm. It's just not as warm as the glow from below. When I'm painting things like gems or well, anything in general, I try to represent them. I try not to paint exactly what they are, because just what I found from observation and trying to dissect how your eyes view things, they don't view exactly what they are down to the little details. And it's super easy to want to just render it out and draw out every little bit of a gem, for example, or a piece of metal or any of those things. But your eye really only sees a hit of light here or there, or a little bit of rim light here and there. So as long as you pick up those visual cues and you apply them, that's more than enough for your eyes to understand that, hey, that's a gem, or hey, that's a piece of metal. And I've noticed that's how paintings, that's how you get the painterly look in paintings. It's because, and I think painterly really refers to how a lot of painters, a lot of very good painters are just so good at representing. They can get away with adding so little detail, but the visual cues that they do put in there, the details that they do put in there, are so accurate. They have so much understanding behind them that they can really get away with putting very little in there and still making you understand the painting. And I think that's where the term painterly comes from. I think this is where I try to resize the breastplate. Yeah. See right here, I did this, and then I flipped back to the sketch, and I found that totally broke the gesture. It made it feel just not very natural anymore. So, and I ended up not keeping that. You might not see me flip back in the time-lapse version. So just flipping it on and off, seeing what I like. Trying to remind myself that I should have some cools in here. So I'm trying to add a little bit more cool color in some of the shadow areas. And color is really relative, so when I say cool, it's so when you cool colors are like certain blues are cool, certain indigos are cool. There's a lot of desaturated colors are cool. Color is so relative that even though the some of the shadows I have are still they're still an orange or a red or even a yellow, which are usually warm colors, but they're desaturated versions. And because color is so relative, I have these really warm colors, these very saturated oranges and reds all around the piece that when I put a less saturated orange or red by it in the shadows, it feels cool. Just because it's cool in comparison to the very hot saturated oranges. So as soon as I put this beam of light coming through the ceiling here, I knew that felt good, and I had this in the back of my mind the entire painting, but I was trying to design it out, and I just couldn't handle refining the light or putting my final lighting in as I was designing. It was just too much, and so as soon as I put this beam of light coming through, it felt nice. I really felt like it would give the point of focus, the chest and the face area. It would just really pop that out, really display it as the point of focus. I always like really interesting pools of light. I noticed that all the really successful illustrations, or the ones that I like most, are usually have really good use of pools of light. There's interesting places in shadow and interesting places in light. So a cool thing I noticed with red, the color red, is that it it turns orange, and when it goes into light, usually, not all the time, and it depends on the material too. I think a common mistake is that if you want a darker red, or if red is going to shadow, it becomes a darker red. And that needs a little bit of preface, I think, because color hues change as they turn form, and as they in the light side they change color, and in the dark side they change color in terms of hue. So red is one of those colors that tend to turn orange in the light, and I've noticed a lot of times it turns more purple in the dark, which makes a lot of sense, because usually if you have a warm light, you want to have a cooler shadow, and if you have a warm shadow, you want to have a cooler light source. Same for greens. Greens tend to turn yellow, or more yellow as they in the light, and they become a little bit more blue as they go into shadow. And when I say blue, I mean that the color is approaching the blue hue. It doesn't actually turn blue, although it can in some cases. I'm refining the rays of light there. I got a real spotty brush, and I put it on overlay, and I kind of put this, I think I put almost a white, I think it's a little bit yellow, and I just transformed that and stretched that out to make it look like beams of light. I wanted to feel like this place was a little bit dusty, so the beams of light really help that, because if there's dust in the air, the dust will catch the light, and you'll be able to see the individual beams. Adding some bounce light from below. I had to be really careful with adding the bounce light. I really didn't want it to become too much and take focus away. I wanted the focus point to feel special, like they're and if everything has a substantial amount of the lighting, you're gonna lose that. Trying to refine some of my edges. I'm always trying to figure out how dark the value range of certain areas should be, especially in the rendering stage, because in the design stage, part 1 and part 2 of this painting, I'm I'm just trying to figure out the design and what's going to be in the painting. It's just, I think maybe somewhere down the line, I'm going to be able to paint and, well, design and light, get my final lighting and all that stuff at the same time. But right now, it's just too much for me to handle. I think that's why a lot of artists work in black and white first, because it's just a lot to handle at once. If you're painting from life or you're painting an environmental scene that's pretty grounded on Earth in reality, I think it's much easier to get your final lighting scheme, I guess, as you are painting. But when you're making stuff up that doesn't already exist, there's a lot more thinking going on, and especially when you do studies, all the lighting is already there. It's just up to you to put it on your canvas and maybe apply a little bit of your own flair to it when you're, copying a photo or painting from life. The lighting information's already there, so it becomes a little bit easier to just lay down the light as it is. It's funny, whenever I start a painting, it always starts with a certain level of uncertainty, and then as I work on it more and more, I start to gain a little bit of confidence, and then towards the end of a painting, I always feel like it's not very good. There are so many great artists out there, and I look at great art so often that it always feels like I'm subpar. But I think one of the most important things that I've learned is to enjoy and like your art, even though you're not good. And I knew it was just because I needed to work harder, but it just seemed like they were so good and so out of reach. And that was kind of disheartening at times, I think. But just realizing that that's the reality of it, that those artists had to work really hard for a really long time. I'm sorry if some of the audio and video don't match up perfectly. I'm still learning to deal with some of the challenges of recording and making videos, so bear with me. Thank you for watching.